Good evening, everybody. It's 21st Century Saints. We're here tonight with our very own Peter Bleakley from Mormon Civil War and our very, very much loved Mormon Freedom Fairy, Lynn Bleakley. And we're here with our podcast editor and chair, producer, Wonder Woman all rolled into one, Jane Christie, and the superb Ruth Heath, who everybody is madly falling in love with as we talk because she brings brilliant stuff to the content to this program. So we're here tonight, 2 years on from the time when Peter was excommunicated from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're going to leave Peter to tell you in his own words why he was excommunicated, and we're going to have a discussion about what that's been like for Peter and Lynn 2 years later, living in exile within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Before we carry on with the programme, Jane, can you just do an update on our survey that we are asking people to complete?
Yes, the big announcement. So on Sunday, Sarah, Ruth, and we went live to launch our survey. So what we're looking for is if you are in any way attached or related to Mormonism in any of its forms, especially we're focused here on the UK. But also, if you're around the world, then we would love to hear from you so that we can get an idea of what your experience is. But what we've done is we've asked for people to come forward to talk about their experiences of abuse. We launched a survey hopefully to make it more comfortable for people to be anonymous. And already we've had incredibly helpful information provided to us. So we just want to say thank you so much to everyone who's reached out, who would prefer to talk by email or in person. Your stories have helped us keep people safe. And the stuff that's coming into us from the survey, whether you choose to do the survey or you choose to do that in person, you're in complete control. The main thing we wanted to stress is that it's completely confidential. We will only know who you are or have any email address or anything like that for you if you provide it to us. So you're in complete control of who you tell, how you tell, and when you tell. What we want to do is to get some information about how prevalent abuse is. Because as we've been working in this space, it's become really clear to us that the church here in the UK, in this area, they don't have an idea of what we're hearing. They don't have an idea of scale. In fact, the numbers that they provided publicly about the scale of abuse here in the UK, it is so low, it's statistically not possible. So we wanted to hear from people who have had experiences or who have witnessed or who are just aware of things that have happened in their ward or stake or their extended families, whatever that might look like, so that we can see where the gaps are. We're already identifying clusters of areas where there are concerns, particular patterns that we would like to see addressed. So the information that you're providing is extremely helpful, and we will give you as much time as you need to tell your story in the way that you find most appropriate. Again, no one gets to know about this. Sarah is involved in these discussions and has met with several people who have just been so brave and coming forward to share their experiences. So and it's it's been really empowering for people. Sarah, when people come forward, you link people in with, if they require it, support services, legal support, that's appropriate. What is it like for someone coming forward? Would you maybe speak to that for a second?
I think for some people come forward for a variety of reasons. A lot of the time, people just want to be heard. They want to know that somebody believes them, that somebody cares about their story or what they've been through, and that somebody is willing to offer support and listen to them and not offer, oh, well, it doesn't matter, but acknowledge the seriousness of the harm that has been done and acknowledge that there is no excuse for the church to not be acting to make church a safe place for people to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's super empowering, and you can find that survey all across our social media channels on our website, 21stcenturysaints.com. We're talking about it on TikTok, on Reels. So if you feel that you can share the survey, it would be incredibly helpful and do a hell of a lot of good. So thank you. Yeah, that's what we've been up
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. And lots of different offers on the table around
So
we can put you
Sarah's
in contact with.
absolutely. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Sometimes Sarah's signal takes a little while to settle down. So while it's settling down at the moment, let's just jump in. The gang's all here. Um, let's talk to you, Peter. Will you maybe take us back to where your story started? How long had you been in the church? What has your Mormon background looked like?
So, back in time. So I grew up in the church. My dad, my great grandmother was the first Bleakley to join the church in 1926, I think it was, and sort of her descendants have all been members pretty much. My dad grew up in the church, and went to Brigham Young University, where he met my mum, who was also English. She was a recent convert, sort of lapsed Catholic background, from Southeast England, and they had an amazing time. It was kind of the end of the 60s, start of the 1970s at BYU. And for both of them, I think it was a real immersion into how the church should be. They'd grown up in the state of the church in Britain was a tiny minority, quite heavily persecuted in lots of ways. Just kind of rebuilding the church from scratch after most people emigrated in the early years of the church. And so they then came back to Britain, to Southeast England. My dad's from Northern Ireland originally. And from then on, we're just busy, busy, busy in leadership roles of various kinds in the church. Dad was branch president pretty quickly upon arrival, with little 2.5-year-old me, or 1.5 then, I don't know, something like that. And later in lots of state leadership roles too. And so was my mum. So my mum was constantly bouncing around between ward and state relief society and primary roles, and regional public affairs later on, and so on. So very much kingdom builders, very faithful. But the kind of Mormonism I grew up with, I've now realized was really unusual, because while being very devoted and serving and all of that, and high religiosity, as it were, while not being overbearing, thank goodness, the real difference or unusual thing was that our conversations at home would be very much, okay, church was a disaster today. All these women got hurt. These things went wrong. What are we going to do about it? It was very much a taking responsibility, a proactive approach of this is a work in progress, which should be a very Mormon concept. We're trying to make this thing work. Mum had a lot of frustration as a woman in the church, dealing with the patriarchy and dealing with different kinds of priesthood leaders who had ultimate control over the sisters that she led and over her. And she had some very positive, productive relationships with priesthood leaders. Others were a bit more fraught. And so I was kind of watching this drama unfold, but very much from the point of view of, where there's something wrong, we can fix it. It's our job to make this work. We're all in this together. Rather than the leaders are infallible and I'm just meant to either be here and complain about them and do nothing, or just trust that everything is fine and not think about it. So I think we've always therefore had this sort of approach, being fixers. If there's a problem, we'll fix it. We'll do something about it. We'll say something. We'll change something. And certainly the version of Mormonism I was being taught theologically absolutely matched that. We're here on earth to learn, to grow, to struggle, to get better, to review our experiences and move forward, and to step up and serve and make these systems go better. And that sort of worked for me for a long time. I served a mission in the Florida Tallahassee mission in America. As an artist, I was able to do some really cool projects, painting murals in local schools, which helped break the ice a lot for the church in the Bible Belt, um, and serving in two little developing branches. So I felt very much at home, because the church in the deep south of the USA was about where it had been here in Britain a few years earlier, sort of through the 1980s. So I really felt comfortable and at home in that situation of some branches, some wards, just starting to get seminary going, you know, building the church up from scratch in a somewhat hostile environment. Um, Came back, went to university, got very involved in Christian Union there, so which I had done as well at secondary school, and that led to some really interesting kind of frictions, where, you know, you'd have an anti-cult campaigner come and do a tour of the local churches, and suddenly I'm being asked not to say prayers in Christian Union meetings. But this kind of backfired on them spectacularly, because a student above me in the art degree, Steve Aitchison, amazing born again Christian from Portsmouth, who was on the leadership committee of the Christian Union, was like, "Well, you can't do that because we're not a church. Why are you telling Peter he can't pray? How do you know he's not a Christian? What are your criteria?" So he started to investigate the church. And he got hold of every anti-Mormon book under the sun you could find. He had a whole box for them. And we spent about 2 years just kind of debating through them, discussing them for hours and hours at length. Um, and in that process, he learnt that Mormonism had a lot of things to say about stuff that his Christianity could not answer. And at the same time, he was researching for himself the early Christian church, and realized it's quite different to the Pentecostal evangelical sort of world he was in, and a bit more formal in a way, and in a way a bit more Mormony. So all of that came together. He eventually read the Book of Mormon, was converted, and joined the church, and his family kicked him out. They've since healed that relationship. He went on a mission to Ireland. We're still great friends, and he's just a wonderful guy in Portsmouth Ward. So for me, that was a really very affirming epiphany about Mormonism as a religion, that this religion has stuff to say, and you can take a really humble, you know, but open-minded, knowledgeable, born-again Christian, and we offer him something he didn't feel he had. Um, and there's stuff here, and I learned so much from wading through all the anti-Mormon stuff about my own faith and where its weaknesses and strengths are in lots of ways. Not all of it was accurate, we now find, of course, in the sense from the apologetic defensive point of view. But it was a wild experience. But then, very soon after that sort of very affirming process, a lot of things started to unravel. We started to subscribe to Sunstone magazine, which I'd come across, I think, where at the end of my mission, I discovered it in Logan Library in Utah, staying with one of my missionary companions. Did a sort of photocopy feeding frenzy. This is before everyone had a phone on their camera, and you had to pay 15p a photocopy. And Mum and I subscribed. And I didn't realize Mum had always been a radical. She was secretly subscribing to Exponent too, which is the sort of the feminist Mormon newspaper. And this gave us a window into a world we had no idea existed. Or maybe my parents had encountered it a bit at BYU, which was, there's these intellectual Mormons. They talk about stuff, they discuss things. There's news, there's Mormon news, you know, because this is all before the internet, or just when the internet was getting going in the early 90s. And very quickly, the September 6th thing happened. These intellectuals, these scholars, some of them teaching at BYU, were excommunicated in a purge orchestrated by Apostle Boyd K. Packer, to silence them because they were telling too much honesty about the history of the church, was the bottom line for most of them, and daring to talk about Heavenly Mother and such awful things. And I learned very quickly that actually I'm on a team. The leadership of my church, the ecclesiastical leadership of the church, are punishing people like me, people who've done what the church told us to: get an education, be passionate about Mormonism, learn about its origins, care about what it's doing now, look at the bigger picture of its place in the world. And they declared war on us. And we've heard later that Boyke Packer basically declared war on feminists, homosexuals, and intellectuals. These were his big enemies of the modern age. And so that started to kind of adjust my relationship with the church. You know, a lot of the trust started to waver in that sense. So I'd always been a bit skeptical, which, you know, I'll speak up if I think something's nonsense. But then, you know, fast forwarding a bit, I think the real trust crisis for me came with the November policy. So I was already starting to get into the internet a bit, start to become informed that the church history narrative we'd all been told wasn't quite accurate. I was slowly encountering groups online. Infants on Thrones were doing a lot that was very intellectual and analytical, as well as hilarious during that time. Discovered Mormon stories, you know, subscribing to Sunstone magazine and then their online presence, and slowly getting the confidence to go further. But when they turned on the children and said that, and it wasn't even well written, the November 2015 policy, it didn't make sense. It was saying basically, if you were had a parent who was cohabiting in a same-sex relationship or had ever cohabited, it had a past tense, which there was no caveat like, but they've since joined the church or repented or not living that lifestyle. Just who had ever, you're contaminated forever. These children would not be allowed to be blessed, baptized, ordained, go to the temple, anything until they were 18, until they were legal adults, but they still had to move out of their gay parents' home or parent who had ever in the past cohabited in the same-sex relationship, and then apply to the first presidency for permission to be baptized. It was insane. It contradicted articles of faith, scriptures, everything, the ethics that the church had always had in the past of, if you've got children whose parents aren't living the perfect Mormon lifestyle, you hold them close, you love them. And that just broke any hope of trust in these people. So from then on, I was kind of on a quest. What has gone wrong? Who's responsible? And can we fix it?
Peter, before
And
we
that
talk about
spiraled. Yeah.
what
Mm.
that quest looked like and where it brought you to, our
Mm.
Mormon freedom fairy, Lynn Bleakley, what are you experiencing? You're a convert, right? What was
Yes.
your Mormonism like?
Well,
Mm.
my mum was a convert, and I was a child convert then. So
Mhm.
I think I was about 3 years old when my mum joined the church. I think some missionaries had come to the school and were doing like a music evening, almost like a family home evening type thing, an big open family home evening. They invited loads of people along.
Really? Oh my gosh, there's no sense of boundaries back then.
And then my mum had the discussions and joined the church. So yeah, I've all kind of, I was so young that I was kind of like in the church from childhood. So and kind of stayed active in the church until my teenage years, when I had a little bit of a Mormon freedom fairy flipped around and just did what I wanted, and living life, learning, being a teenager. So church really wasn't a place that I felt comfortable being at church on a Sunday, when I was doing things that kind of contradicted what I was listening to on a Sunday, and then it was a bit boring. So so yeah, but then I was living my life. I was a single parent. I fell pregnant and as a teenager, and had my son Jordan, and then went to live in Portugal for a couple of years. And it was while I was in Portugal with Jordan's dad, that I kind of got a bit bored with life there. And on a visit to the UK, every time I'd visit the UK, I'd stay with my mum, and practically the missionaries were around practically every day for dinner.
Coincidentally.
Coincidentally, So anyway, yeah, they invited me to a baptism. I got kind of friendly with a couple of them. They invited me to a baptism, and then started my journey back to the faith. And that was a bit of like everything that I do it fast and furious if I can.
Mostly furious.
Mostly furious or fast,
So
so
what's your
yeah.
Mormonism like then, Lynn, at that point? So when you're back and you're all in back, right? What's that like for you? Are you seeing any of the problems that Peter was seeing? How nuanced are you? Tell us a little bit about that.
Not nuanced at all, really. At all. Not in any way. I was absolutely blinkered. I remember saying to my mum, I remember reading the Book of Mormon from cover to cover in a couple of nights, and my mum had given me this blessing, which was given to us by our patriarch. But it wasn't a patriarchal blessing, but it was a blessing that he gave us when we had immigrated from the UK we tried to emigrate to the USA. And he had given the whole family a blessing, and my mum had recorded that and written it down. So she was giving me this, and I'm all happy that I'm coming back to church. I read the Book of Mormon from cover to cover, and I remember saying to her, oh, kind of like, oh, duh, how stupid was I that I've had this in my life, all my life, and I haven't seen it for what it is. I really had a big kind of almost like a Parley P. Pratt, who read the Book of Mormon really quickly and was converted. Yeah, real deep experience. That was my Mormonism. Was then I was all in, and every moment of every day was focused on. I was about 21, 22, and obviously I wasn't seminary age, but I did all the seminary. I got all the manuals. I got everything that I could get hold of. I got all the videos and everything, and it was just a consuming anything Mormon, and it was a deep conversion without any nuance, really. It was quite harsh because then I left Portugal and left Jordan's dad. It was really black and white for me. So I told Jordan's dad that I wanted to go back to church, and he wasn't happy with that situation. Well, he was okay with it until I was reading the Gospel Principles, Gospel Essentials manual, and I came across the Law of Chastity chapter. And I was like, oh, yeah, there's that. Oh, whoops. I forgot about this Law of Chastity thing. So, yeah, I told him about that, and he kind of, he wasn't in with that. And that was kind of like the beginning of the end for us. So, yeah, whereas I was all in.
Yeah. And
that was tough on him. He's a lovely guy. He's a really nice man. And so that was quite hard for him to sort of cope with that sudden change. I mean, that's
it's really harsh. But I was like,
cool that looking back that you guys still clearly have a good relationship. So where do your stories intersect then? So how do you meet? What does that look like? I feel like I'm just taking your story back here so far because there's things that I haven't heard about this yet, and it's really interesting.
It's cool. You're welcome.
This is awesome.
So I got married in my so I got married in my mid-20s. Married the daughter of the bishop in a nearby ward, who was also a single mum. We were married for, I don't know, I keep forgetting how long.
I don't know.
10 or 12 years, married in the temple. And it's very good for the first few years. we had some real difficulties when her son, who I adopted, had some major health issues, and it kind of put a lot of psychological pressure and crisis on all of us, really. And she became disillusioned with the church and stopped attending, and eventually wanted a divorce. And my attitude was, do what you like, love. You know, I'm not here to tell you what to believe or anything. So it was never like because she was inactive that was a problem. That wasn't the reason. Although I think might have been a factor for her that I was still sort of sticking with it still. And so that was difficult. But we got my son through to 18 mostly intact. He's a good kid. And so then I'd got to know Lynn sort of socially at church dances and things. She was in the same stake, and we'd have a little chat every so often, and I'd always forget your name. And her son Jordan, who must have been like, well, a young teenager initially, obviously. So I got to know Jordan a bit actually when I was in young men's leadership and we had a camp, and so I finally got to know the kid we were always talking about. So anyway, after that divorce, my resolve was definitely cannot marry a single mother. It's too messy. There's so much baggage and history and complications and all the rest of it. So do not make that terrible mistake again. And sort of, hi, I'm on the marriage market again, maybe. I don't know what's going on. We then got match made by a mutual friend who'd moved to my ward.
This is Peter's recollection.
And
by the way.
Lynn phoned me up and asked why I hadn't asked her out yet. And so I said, well, that's very remiss of me. And so agreed to a double date with her friend and her fiance, and put the phone down, and then ran from one end of my tiny flat to the other screaming because this was, I'm too polite to say no to the single mum, but it's like, no, I'm not meant to be doing this. It's all a disaster. What was I thinking? But Lynn was obviously amazing and lovely, but been there before. And so we had the date, went bowling, didn't we? You came as a cowgirl with like your cool boots and jeans and everything. Fortunately, she was in the loo when I actually fell flat on my back on the bowling alley, which was good. She missed seeing that spectacle. And then we had a follow-up date in Canterbury. It was winter, wasn't it? It was like January or something, really cold. But
yeah. Too much detail, darling.
And and Lynn made the dreadful mistake she's never repeated since of spending longer in the second-hand bookshop than I did. So it's like, oh, she likes books. She now hates my books with a passion. And so it's like, oh, there's potential here. Obviously, she can cope with the archive. But no, we really clicked. And was it on that date that we had the talk? Yeah, second date. We went to some Cuban restaurant and we sat. No, I know, but we can practice for that. And we laid it all out, because in the church where people often talk about how it's all about marriage, it's not like just having fun and having a relationship. And particularly when you're older and at our age, you don't mess about. You haven't got time to invest in a relationship that hasn't got a chance of going somewhere. So we just had this very long, brutally frank conversation about our entire lives and laid nearly everything on the table, second date. None of us ran screaming from the building. So it was like, okay, right, we got that bit out of the way. Yes. And
Lynn, your
so
version. Your version.
Yeah, go on.
much shorter. Well, basically, we knew each other from church. We were like in youth, around each other in youth and young single adults. I remember Peter getting married first time. And I don't think I came to your wedding. I did get an invitation, but I didn't go to his first wedding. And then I was a single parent in the church for 16 years on my own,
which is tough,
which
really
was
hard.
yeah, I can tell
Oh, go
them
on
how
then.
tough it is, darling. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, it was in a family orientated church, so that's a lot of my kind of there was a big disturbance in the force for me because of that experience of being in the church as a single parent, and the constant rejection because I was chewed gum, such lollipop, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, so I knew that Peter was interested in me. At some of the dances he'd talk to me, he'd forget Jordan's name.
Yeah. I can mostly remember your name. That's
Yeah,
quite
you'd
good for
remember
me.
my name. Just
Because I'm a
about.
teacher, I have no memory for names left. It's all been used up.
And
That's my
excuses.
excuse.
And yeah, so I knew that he was interested in me, but he was just like dragging it out for some reason. So my impatience got the better of me, and I phoned him and said, well, what are you doing? Why haven't you asked me out yet? Come on, let's get with the program here. And yeah, we went on a date, and we got married pretty quickly, I guess.
Well, we were going to be
We wanted to
sensible.
be
We're
married
like,
before we turned
yeah,
40.
we were about to turn 40. So like, we want to get married while we're still in our 30s. 39.
That counts.
So we ended up marrying the following summer.
Yeah,
in
and I
reverse
thought that
a few
I was
months.
marrying a Peter priesthood, it soon became
Royalty, darling, Mormon royalty. I'm a Bleakley.
it soon became apparent that I wasn't marrying, what my ideal Peter priesthood looked like, someone that prayed together as a couple and did all of those really horrible, cringy, culty Mormon things, like interviewing your children, praying
Triplets.
together,
Yeah.
every day and every night, and fasting together and reading your scriptures together. And I mean, that's great, but the way that I imagined it was in a very deeply Mormon, squeaky clean way.
Yeah. So what
I was a bit
happens
lazy
then?
for that.
Because you guys have got from, really what the ideal Mormon couple and this cool version of it, because you have a blended family now. How do you get from Peter? I get your experience where there is this event that's a problem. What about you, Lynn? Where do you first start experiencing concerns or challenges to your faith? Was
Did you
Peter
get
the
the thing?
challenge to your faith? Was it
Yes,
Peter?
basically, yeah. Let's get there quick. Yes, Peter was not necessarily, I can think for myself, and in hindsight, I can look back and I can see moments of sheer frustration with church structure, church doctrine, church teachings, the damage that it did to me personally. So I can look back now and see those things differently.
We have a brilliant comment from David, who officiated at your wedding and said it was the best wedding he's ever officiated at. Okay, keep going, keep going.
Yeah, we did have a large attendance at our wedding because we were older. Obviously, we had a lot of friends. My suggestion is there are pluses for getting married early, because then you haven't built up this massive friend group that you need to then invite to the wedding. Well, we just wanted everyone to celebrate with us because it had been so long, for me to wait to get married.
So a mere 300 guests and a Kaylee band and that sort of thing.
It's a
You
bit,
guys had a
it was a bit
Kaylee?
mental.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh,
superb.
yeah, of course.
Oh, superb.
So
Okay.
I mean, our wards were amazing. They really pulled out the stops to set up Hastings Chapel and bring chairs at the last minute, and just loads of people rallied round, and just as we'd done for them and their families and everyone in the ward. You know, I think that's a wonderful thing about the church in Britain particularly, is we do great weddings. You know, we rally around and help and support and
so
make it an event that's you wouldn't normally be able to afford for a lot of people.
so we just wanted everyone just wanted to celebrate with us, because I think a lot of people had seen the pain that I had been through. You know, I'm quite an open book, really. So a lot of people had seen that, so a lot of people wanted to celebrate that. So so my I think being married to Peter, my expectation, you know, my expectation about how a Mormon couple should be, that was all kind of blown up in smoke.
Oh, it's a crushing disappointment.
I find that really interesting, though, you guys, because you'd had the experience of doing it on your own, Lynn, and swimming against the tide in Relief Society, I imagine, and sitting through all of those lessons about this is the ideal, and then you get, in inverted commas, the ideal, not to dish you, Peter, but the experience of the ideal. It's not you, Peter, and
Thanks, Peter. Don't worry, I'm okay with that.
Your responses, it isn't all that it's cracked up to be, which is the reality, and that's what's never spoken about openly, which is, for most women at church, however lovely the guy is, you kind of go, well, I'm waiting for the wonderful to come. I'm waiting for this fantastic thing to come, because it is all just nicely lit, ensign cover sort of pictures, isn't it, of what this eternal marriage looks like. But actually the reality is just regular relationship.
Yeah, and you'd think I would have learned because I'd had experience of, you know, being on my own for so long. So there was a lot of fasting, there was a lot of prayers, there was a lot of effort, there was a lot of going to young single adult activities, there was a lot of, well, what am I not doing
to earn the reward,
to earn this reward? You know,
Yeah.
this equation is not working, you know. You know, the Lord says if you do what he says, then, you know, you will get the promise is guaranteed. But you know, so, and then of course it's all my fault that that's not happening. But so during that experience, lots of prayers, and I remember just like having a light bulb moment one day, just thinking, what am I worrying about? If I'm going to have a celestial marriage, which was some of the teachings I had kind of held on to, was that if I hang in here in the eternities, well, I am going to get a husband, right? So then I'm going to have a celestial marriage. I'm going to have this wonderful ideal thing. So why am I hankering after a mortal marriage here right now, kind of thing? And this light bulb moment, that kind of then got me through some more years, because I was like, well, yeah, because I'll just get a celestial marriage, you know, I can wait, kind of thing. But yeah,
you're also very impatient.
but I'm also very patient. Yeah,
imagine you waiting to death for anything.
So you'd think I would have maybe kind of figured it out beforehand, you know, that the reality of an earthly marriage was not going to be everything I thought it was going to be, that you read in the books. It's not going to be this ideal Mormon experience, you know, with lots of kids and, you know, all this lovely spiritualness and
a grief or a loss attached to that realization. That, you know, or was it a freeing realization? Was it a good thing?
Well, at that time, it was a comforting realization. Right. It was okay, well, don't worry that I haven't got it now. What am I worried about? Why do I want this inferior circumstance when I'm going to have the top-notch, you know, celestial kingdom marriage in the eternities. So, you
As a
know,
polygamous wife.
I didn't think about that.
Okay. Sarah, we can't hear you.
Okay.
You're muted.
No, we've still got you
I
muted,
don't think she's
Sarah.
muted.
Maybe log out and come back in again, Sarah, because it might be an audio issue with your connection. We'll try that. So what's it like for you guys as you as you get to November? Are you an all-in
Yeah.
Mormon, both of you, when November happens?
I think I'm already somewhat nuanced and skeptical, and aware of, because that was like 2015 was like 5 years after our marriage.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to learn more and so on, but again, for me, that wasn't any different. This is just, you know, it's new, it's increments, but it's kind of more of the same.
What I had seen was you,
Yeah.
like, as being an observer of your journey, that you would trying, you know, apologetics. You were seeing people around you, Stephen Bloor, for example, and other people like that, reaching out to Peter for answers. Other friends, our friend who's on the podcast tonight, Dave, reaching out and asking Peter questions, because Peter's very well read, you know, as he said, he would have Sunstone and all of these things and be very nuanced and very knowledgeable. So many people would reach out to him. So he was trying his hand at apologetics in many ways. That's how I observed it.
And always trying to be not deny the problems,
Yeah.
but just offer enough to hold on, you know, or whatever. But that's
still
certainly
problematic.
Yeah, but that was certainly the period where the Bloggernacle was getting going properly, and people were starting to drop like flies. Like, people were leaving. Our peers were getting very disillusioned with things. People we'd served in bishoprics with and relief society presidencies and all the rest of it were just starting to leave, or lose their trust in these leaders for completely valid reasons. And that was the real motivator to be the rescuer, I guess, to try and fix things or work out what's going on and why, because we'd grown up with this trajectory of incredible growth, you know, and it wasn't illusionary. In Britain, while the rest of the country lost its religion, Mormonism grew. And a lot of people of our generation now talk about this kind of golden age of the late 80s, early 90s, when we were far enough away from the racist segregation and before the real modern Pharisaical clampdown, where you still had a wonderful, vibrant social life in the church. They still had activities committees. You could have an entire youth and young adult life that was all socializing with Mormons. And you were having way more fun than your secular friends, because you just met so many more people. You had more stuff to go to. You weren't coming home reeking of cigarettes and unconscious because of the alcohol, with basically war stories to tell. It's just, we had a great time and we carried on having a great time. And after the dance, we went to McDonald's and carried on talking and met these lovely people. I was so drunk by that point, I don't remember what happened from then on. So we were having a high quality of life in a community that seemed to be global, multiracial, multicultural, inclusive in lots of ways. Because this was still a time where the real distinctions around LGBTQ people and other things in the church and the rest of society, the separation hadn't really become obvious. And it was thrilling. It was all very positive. So I think there was a lot of momentum still into the 2000s from that experience.
So,
But
Peter,
I think we actually had sorry, I was just going to say, I'll put a point pin in it and come back, that when we were trying to get a clearance for us to be sealed in the temple, that was an early eye-opener for us of some major dysfunctions, which I can go back to in a minute. But go on, yes, your question.
I was just going to say, because I completely understand where you're coming from, because active members, we're doers. We are the ones that just go, what needs doing, we'll make it happen. We'll put the tables up, we'll cook the dinners, we'll do everything that needs doing. We make it happen. We make the fun happen. We bring it with us, and it's such a vibe, and it's so brilliant. But isn't it interesting that when your friends turn to you for support and answers, that you still feel like you need to fix the problem, you need to be the answers, and you get punished for doing that. You don't get punished for putting up the trestle tables and hosting a wedding for 300 people, but you get punished for trying to find the answers to the problems that the church has created with its own narrative of its own history. Because it's when you talked in the beginning about anti-Mormon literature, that's the same literature that is now proven to be truthful narratives and truthful history of the church that the church just tried to obfuscate. I'm sure there's some nonsense in there as well, but the majority of it was actual facts that the church is now not only admitting to, but quietly sliding into the records of the church, so that the next generation down thinks it's always been there. How does it feel to be castigated for being a doer and a fixer when it comes to the facts of the church?
Well, for me, I think that moment already came when they fired the September 6th, because these are people doing what the church told them to do. And this is the thing, that the church raises people who are very literate, very educated and informed about their history. Unfortunately, half of it's totally inaccurate, but they've been introduced to thinking about history and learning about it from a young age, studying the scriptures intensively in seminary between 14 and 18. You really, if you're nerdy with it, you massively internalize a lot of information, and you get quite a maturity in your understanding of scripture and the values that the scriptures are teaching. And to then find out that your church, or start to notice that your church is not practicing those core values, and that it punishes you for becoming like a god, for learning, for the glory of God is intelligence, for losing the fearlessness that a lot of the more enlightened leaders in the past used to have, who were intellectuals, who were scientists like Hugh B. Brown, John A. Whitsoe, Talmage, and I later found out, who had personally mentored my family, that when my great grandmother Jeannie Bleakley joined the church, she lived in Ceylon, and so she was doing Mormonism by correspondence. She was the only member in Ceylon for years, but the Whitsoes particularly reached out to her. He was an apostle and a scientist and an educator. And so the materials they were sending her were very intellectual, very pro-science. Her son was a GP, a doctor, and knew Gordon B. Hinckley while he was serving his mission in London. My granddad. So that was something that was fundamental to the Mormonism I grew up with, and I didn't know that hardly anyone else was experiencing that, or those who did quickly got wiped out of the church during these purges and during this beginning of hostility to intellectuals. So it is a huge injustice.
Those things. They didn't even factor on my radar until I was married to Peter, and learned about them. And I think I think if anyone's going to be called a lazy learner, it's me.
Well,
I never sat Lynn.
there?
I never sat Lynn down. I never sat Lynn down and said, "Right, Lynn, you need to know this stuff." I mean, obviously, when I started posting things in Facebook, she could read it, and she heard me podcasting and all of that. I knew that as soon as Lynn actually got her head around the scale of lying and theft and charity fraud and everything else going on, she'd be off like a whippet. She would not need persuading. She'd overtake me in her hostility to this mess, which has indeed occurred. So in a sense, I didn't need to try and bring her along. She worked it out for herself.
So what got you excommunicated then? And not just what got you excommunicated, why did it get you excommunicated? So what did you do? And because most people, if they're experiencing a bit of a disconnect between what is being taught and what's being experienced, in the UK, probably around the world, they just leave, right? So you could have just left, but that's not how you've been taught. You're fully engaged. You know that you can make a difference. So why'd you get excommunicated?
Why do you think I got excommunicated?
Just before
darling?
you go off on 10 minutes of
I'll try and keep it
story.
short.
I could sum it up in a couple of words. He's too gobby. He's
Potty mouth.
he's too gobby. That's what it is. He can't you know, it's to be commended, you know, that he will speak up when he sees injustices, and he will fight for that.
Lynn,
So-
were you worried, Lynn, around this time when you saw Peter being very vocal and speaking up and podcasting and talking? Were you what sort of worries and fears and concerns did you have at that time?
There were arguments. There were arguments between the two of us. My immediate reaction to the things that I would hear him say, like he would listen to conference and he'd shout at the TV. In the end, like I didn't want to listen to conference. You know, I'd be like, oh no, I don't want to listen to conference, because he'd be shouting at the TV, you idiots! And I'm like, you cannot call a prophet of God an idiot. You know, I was a typical defensive reaction. You know, it would really make me super uncomfortable hearing the things that he said.
Was some of that defensive, Lynn, because of all the things that we've been taught about eternity and eternal consequences if we call the prophet an idiot and things like that? Was that some of the worries that you had at that time?
Yeah, I think it was just I think you could probably see just from what we've discussed so far that, you know, our types, you know, I'm a bit of a black and a white person, so it's either this or it's not, and kind of logical. And so I was firmly in the camp of, you know,
Faith and trust.
full-blown, Mormon faith and trust, and and the fear of that all come crashing down. It's so the tentacles reach out into every aspect of your life, don't they? So if that one thing breaks, you know, then the rest come tumbling down. And so there's the fear of that. There's the fear of,
could we maybe address this fantastic comment, David? All of your comments are so appreciated. This one is just beautiful. And you talk about how Peter, on the one hand, is calling out leaders, compared to, you use the word cowardly exiting at an appropriate moment, and it's not cowardly. It's not cowardly at all, because so many people just realize, I'm talking to a brick wall. The church isn't going to change. There is no point of this. Whereas Peter and people who are staying and trying to engage, it's right for you. I really relate, Lynn, that even today, you know, using the words lie, hypocrite, Peter, the stuff Peter says makes me feel like I'm going to have a nosebleed, because because
that's what I was living with, Jane. Like, right? Every day, imagine hearing that every day, you know.
Yeah, and we've been through this whole journey, you know, at your side. And how many times have we had the conversation around, you could just tone down your language and it may be better received, perhaps. So talk a little bit about that, why you were excommunicated.
It was why you were excommunicated.
Well, I was absolutely tone policed out of the church, like very specifically, which is quite interesting. So I mean, what I was doing was I started simply posting in Facebook. You know, I was participating a lot in all the groups in social media and commenting. Of course, most mainstream members don't see any of that. But I started to post in Facebook my concerns. I'd share, you know, these things are wrong. This is immoral. These are lies. These people are lying. And I was saying it how it is. And the church has a very hyper-vigilant culture of tone policing the language you use for anything, for prayer, for talking about stuff. Women particularly can't be strident or passionate. You have to use primary voice and look demure and apologize for having your opinions, or men won't listen to you. So I just rode the wave of what tiny bit of male privilege I had and said it anyway. And And this started to be noticed because a lot of people are my Facebook friends in my ward and in my extended family and around the place. I'd love to know what conversations are being had. I know that my parents were being talked to on the back, room sort of chatter and other things like that. Occasionally I've got little glimpses of it.
Well,
They were basically terrified that I was going to break people's testimonies, which is always the thing with there's this threat of contagion. That if Peter, who has some Mormon cred and is kind of respected as informed and usually seen as a bit of an authority or knowledgeable, is saying these things, the fallout could be catastrophic. I think was their fear. And so it took me a while to calm down enough to have reasonably calm conversations. There'd be long, intense ones with my church leaders, poor things, bless them, my poor stake president. But I mean, and if I think of one example of how I was just shocked at how blatant suddenly the leaders were being in their lying. When Dallin Oaks did his, and Dallin Oaks and Ballards did a face-to-face, they started doing these face-to-faces with the young people where they'd pretend to answer questions they hadn't heard before and already vetted. And it was remarkable because they were speaking off the cuff, and they always give much more away about themselves than their very carefully written and scripted general conference talks, although those in themselves are very revealing anyway, if you look at them. And that started to be my thing, to actually pay attention to what they're saying and be like, did you guys all hear that apostle there lie, contradict Jesus, and set fire to what we thought was Mormonism in general conference in front of all your faces? Like, did any of you just hear that? Because I did. And I know I'm not alone, because Dave Silsby in the state presidency is hearing this and becoming very concerned, and all these other people are. Are you going to notice that this is not acceptable? And people weren't noticing. Some were, and they'd leave, obviously, but you're still dealing all the time with the institutional solidarity of the TBMs and the leadership at church. And Ballard in this said the leaders of the church have never hidden anything from anybody from the beginning of time, sweeping generalization. And he and Oakes are experts and know what they're talking about. And he'd just given the example of the 1832 first vision that was hidden for decades in a safe by the apostles of the church to hide it from us, as an example of them being open and honest, because it eventually got published after someone let slip it existed. And I sat down my poor parents and I had this, it must have been on my computer, and I just wanted them to listen to this and hear this blatant lie. But I was so livid, I kept stopping it every 20 seconds to be like, and then he said this, look, and then this, and I couldn't contain myself. My dad said, will you let us just listen to the thing, and process it in our own time frame? But I was so angry because it was a complete betrayal of everything. Rationality, our religion, everything my parents had taught me to value about honesty and so on. It was just there, an apostle doing it in front of the kids,
but
just maddening. Yeah.
you did all the posting, you did you'd speak up at church and things like that. But in the early days, even like those situations, I would try and talk to Peter about, well, no, you're twisting his words, you are not seeing that's not his intent, you're seeing it this way because that's your paradigm now. I'm trying really hard to not think the same way as he was thinking, and I guess I was still seeing it with fairly Mormon eyes.
And the feedback always was exactly what you said, Jane. The TBMs are not going to listen to you unless you tone down the language. They can't cope mentally with hearing their prophet called a liar. You just can't do that if you're thinking you're going to get through to them and be persuasive, which was a fair point.
Well, so there were other experiences of Peter giving a talk and saying things that were not the right words, not the right tone,
Mm.
the wrong angle to things, not the positive Mormon angle. So he's talking about EFY, and he's talking about, you know,
Oh yeah, we nearly got run out of Cornwall.
yeah.
I forgot
So
about that.
so he got threatened basically, and this was that was a real eye opener for me, that a bishop
Oh
could
no,
behave
you
in the
have
way
to
that this
you
bishop
have to
behaved.
take us into this story.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So I'm in early rage phase. My sister's ward in Helston in Cornwall, very traditional ward, really lovely, good people, but they'd been through a
really, you
trauma.
didn't need the room.
I did not
babe.
read through them. They're well, I sort of did.
Well,
And didn't care. Their Bishop Blore, who is now like one of the major, or became one of the major sort of anti-Mormons in Britain, had had his own faith deconstruction while serving as Bishop of Helston Ward. And he hadn't ever heard about Joseph Smith's polygamy, among many other things. I actually challenged him on this. So when he first
don't
started
go
talking
off on a
about it online,
tangent.
I said, "Are you kidding? Yeah, surely you must have known. You're a bishop, you know. It's in somewhere in the curriculum." And he said, "No, it isn't." And
It's
so I
not.
took the challenge, and he turned out to be right. I found like one really obscure reference in some institute manual somewhere, but he was right. You could grow up in the church and be a bishop for years and have no idea Joseph Smith had more than one wife. I mean, it was extraordinary. So he left
It's
the church
deceptive,
very
isn't it?
dramatically. Was
That's what it comes down to. It's
yeah,
just deceptive.
yeah,
It's not-
yes, and he was quickly excommunicated. It was very traumatic for this poor wards, and several people left over it. So I got asked to give a talk in, because we'd go and visit my sister there, and you know, they just wanted speakers, someone different to give a talk. So I was invited to give a talk. So I gave a talk, and this was around the time of the I think of the November policy, something like that. And I was talking about Christians versus Pharisees, you know, which became the theme of my podcast. How, you know, we have two versions of the religion. You can be obsessed with rules. And I actually held up an EFY poster. This is the early days of FSY, for the Strength of Youth, when they're pioneering it in Britain. And it had very clear diagrams of what clothing was acceptable for the young men and the young women at this event. And I just said, you know, this is the Phariseeism here. And I kind of flung it behind me. Have you ever seen that at pulpit? And that wasn't the thing that upset everyone. What even was it? Was it just saying that,
Well, the bishop was sat there,
yeah,
absolutely steam coming out
yeah,
of his ears, that Peter was
daring to criticize the
daring to
leaders and
criticize,
saying that they don't get
this.
everything right, they're not perfect, you know, and we have to be aware of this and kind of work around it. So anyway, afterwards, one of the older, more sort of woke sisters quickly pulled me to a side, and she said, "I loved your talk. Thank you so much. You're way ahead of your time. You will never be allowed to speak in this ward again." and I think did we have a conversation with the bishop, or did we just escape?
No,
We
you
escaped.
remember what
Yeah.
happened.
All right, come on.
So
Can I tell you
Quick
an
short version,
FSY
then go on.
story? So I was going to say, I
Go
had
on.
an
Yeah.
FSY story over dinner last night from my daughters,
Yeah.
who are 26 and 22 now. And they
Mm.
said, head, shoulders, knees and toes, Mum. And I
That's
said,
it, yeah.
I don't know what you mean. And they went, no, they do it on the stand at FSY. You put your arms above your head, and if you can see your midriff, the clothes aren't suitable. You've got to have your shoulders covered. And then you've got to have your knees covered, because that's obviously going to set the boys off. And then you've got to touch your toes, and they'll check to see if they can see the back of your knees at the back of your skirt. How humiliating, how sexualizing of women, how making women responsible for men's thoughts. It's just utterly, and they'll have them stand like cattle on a stage and do this like it's a fun fucking activity as part of FSY. How is that strengthening youth?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
completely objectifying.
And
women.
you know,
sick.
and we're in our 40s and 50s,
grooming.
and we know how many, we know that for decades this church has invested thousands of man hours in raising children through primary, and then thrown them away as youth because they came with some wrong haircut to a youth dance, and were humiliated on the door by some pious, self-righteous twit who thought he was doing the world a favor by informing them they're immodestly dressed. and
Yeah.
sending them away,
Yeah.
or
And
some
as a parent,
sister ready to give them a cardigan to wear, you know.
yeah. And as a parent, I paid
So
for my children to have that privilege.
Yeah.
It just makes me
yeah, it's obscene. Yeah. And I mean, I think they're toning that down a little bit now, but not much.
I really hope so.
Oh, no,
So,
they definitely
but
have.
yeah, so
To give
that's
a
what I
little
was
bit
talking about in
more
this talk.
context, though, since
Yeah.
since we're talking about how you're being perceived, you're making the leaders nervous.
Mm,
You're talking about the youth, and that's something that's sacred territory there, because
Yeah.
we want to protect those people. Would you like to give more context to what kind of way you're being perceived? I believe you made a young woman burst into tears at a
Oh,
particular
we'll get to that. Yeah.
event.
So I mean, I'll just finish the Cornwall story
Sure,
first. But
sure.
yeah. So we're on the way. We're driving home that day after church.
Happened before that.
What?
A lot happened before that. So
Oh, go
Peter
on.
gave his talk. The bishop was steaming, phoned to the family later that day and upset your sister because your sister, I think your brother-in-law was on the
On the
bishopric.
bishopric. Yeah.
So the bishop phones the
Yeah. He
other
bullied Laura.
member of the
Yeah.
bishopric and says, you suggested that Peter speak, and what were you doing? This was this was terrible and it was wrong. So they're defending Peter, and then ensues this battle. The battle lines are drawn. Then ensues this big family, not conflict, but discussion about, your parents are worried that you were going to be kicked out of the church. You want to be careful what you say, and like
But
that.
before that, just to interrupt, on literally driving home from Cornwall, the bishop phoned me,
Yeah, well, that's after.
and he
Of course it was.
no, the paranoid camera. Well, anyway, either way, and he just had to go. He just said, "I don't know why he gave that talk. What if you were in my ward, I would be trying to
take your temper
yeah,
recommend.
no, it was not in person. It was on the phone while we were driving away. Yes,
Sorry, we're getting
yes,
our facts. We're going to have the
Go for it.
right.
domestic.
But
We were there overnight
yeah,
during the Sunday. A lot of
okay,
discussion
yeah,
happened, a lot of to and fro in discussions with the
yeah.
bishop, where the bishop then we're
We're not talking directly to the bishop though.
no, we
No,
weren't talking directly to
he
bishop,
was
but
leaning on our
yes,
family
but he
members. Yeah,
threatened to take away your temple recommend.
yeah,
So he was just being a bully. He threatened to
yeah.
take away Peter's temple
So
recommend. So, and then on
that,
the journey home, he said he was asking for Peter's state president's details so that he could contact his state president to take away his temple recommend. And the family weren't really giving it up.
yeah.
You
And
know,
he said that to me on the way
without a
home,
fight.
like on the phone. He just said to me, if you're in my ward, I would want your temper recommend now, sort of thing, and so on. And we were literally driving out of Cornwall, so it's like trying to get out of Dodge. It's like something from the Dukes of Hazzard. We're driving away. It's like, get away from these people. They're after our temple recommends. It's nuts. So, and my mum's always been a bit more of a rebel, sort of very keen, so very supportive in her own way of trying to change things and challenge the patriarchy and so on. But at the same time, fully indoctrinated with the fear.
Yeah, but
And
even
this
she
is
was worried at that
and
time
yeah,
that
very
your
much.
temple recommend would
Yeah,
get taken
no,
away.
absolutely. And it just,
That
I
was
mean,
the
one of the
beginning of
things
it.
that's radicalized me is seeing what it's done to my parents, that they in their own way, mum quite vocal and feisty when she needs to be, dad always the quiet voice in the meeting, talking reason and fairness and justice. They're both, very principled and willing to speak up in their own styles. But the fact that I watched them so paranoid, so terrified that if I carried on saying these things, we'd lose everything. My temper recommend would be gone, my priest would be gone. Just the fear. And no, you can't say this, you can't speak up, you can't do this. And
Without a temple recommend,
yeah,
you are then your status is changed, isn't
yeah,
it? So without
yeah.
that, then you've not got your celestial marriage, you've not got your this, that, and it all starts the
It's a huge power that they
the
hold
house of
over you.
cards starts
Yeah.
coming down, doesn't it?
So over time, I'll try and be more succinct. So I started my new state president, very woke, very supportive of LGBTQ people in lots of really significant ways. He was the one who finally actions something that had been brewing for a long time in our state, to have proper safeguarding protocols and to insist on DBS checks and safeguarding training of all of our anyone working with young people. And he made that so around the time I was advocating for the Protect Every Child campaign of Sam Young, and he allowed me to sort of have some input into that state policy as a teacher, just from my perspective and training. Bless his heart. So he started meeting with me, and he met with me for hours on end in a few meetings over a few months. He'd come to church and ask to speak to me, and he'd listen. He wouldn't always give her a lot away. Not that obviously it's at all easy to get a word in edgeways when I'm in full flow. And now I'd have handled those quite differently. I think I'd have been a bit more restrained and targeted. But I was new at this. I'm now much better at getting some simple points across quickly to state presidents I'm talking about. Yeah, I've got it down to only half an hour, as we tried out on Nemo's state president recently, bless him. Actually, that was more like 25 minutes. I was quite proud. But the poor guy. And what I'm trying to do is this banging the head against the wall thing you described. You know, that I'm trying, is there anything here that where they'll open their eyes and see what's in front of their own face? The fact that your stake, I'll keep saying this, Tim, you are not going to have a stake in 5 or 10 years. It will be gone. The children will be gone. You're losing some of your best leaders because of this stuff, because you're not educating them about the gospel topics essays. You're perpetuating the lies. You don't understand how bad it is when these people steal tithing and all of that. And he was actually quite a new member, which is one of the reasons for some of his strengths in a way, having a fresh look at things. He took a long time to join the church. His wife was a member, and he'd been a bishop, but only really a member for 10 to 15 years before being state president. So I saw potential there, you know, and just he's an academic and a thinker and so on. But ultimately, what he could not handle was me calling the leaders' names. He just couldn't cope with that. He couldn't cope with me. Well, I remember we must come back to something on the Helston Bishop. So there's sort of an interesting postscript to that, and make sure I do that. And it started to escalate. I started podcasts. Yes, while I was writing these huge thousands of words long posts for Facebook and very not internet savvy, technically, I suddenly thought, well, I might as well just record it. I'll record this as a voicemail.
No, it was
As
your sister
a
Kate who
voice.
suggested it
Yeah,
because
was
she
it
was
Kate? Yeah.
sick of reading your lengthy
Yes, she
things.
said,
So
why
she
can't
said,
you
"Oh
just
well, if
record
you
it?
recorded it, I'll listen to it instead."
So I started posting that, and that then quickly evolved into the podcast, which was audio for a long time. And then John DeLynn challenged me to go video, which was good, but it now takes 3 times as long to make an episode. But because I was content, and there just came this moment where he basically drew a line in the sand and said, if you continue doing this and don't take down these podcasts and your voicemail and everything, I will have to take action on the basis of the church's definition of apostasy, which means you're not allowed to criticize the leaders. You cannot at all publicly. And they've actually clamped down the definition of apostasy, that you can't speak against the church's leaders or doctrines or even policies now, which means any tiny detail without any doctrinal significance they put in the handbook, a policy which we used to think was a lesser category, and they'd use that as an excuse. Oh, the racism was just a policy, not a doctrine. You know, they'd use that as their fig leaf. They've doubled down on it now under the influence of Oakes, I think, because he's taught this in conference. So it's probably him, that there's, in a church led by God, there's no difference between a doctrine or a policy. It's all infallibly the will of God, you know. So there is no, in their definition in the handbook, there is no escape for anyone. You cannot make any kinds of criticism of anything to do with the church, no doctrine, no policy, no leader, without incurring automatic state president-led trial for apostasy. And he must consult with the area presidency when it's an apostasy case. So he did that. and they set a date for trial. And this was at the tail end of COVID. I wasn't backing down. By this point, I had already listened in to the recordings of John DeLynne's excommunication and Bill Reel and CES guy, what's his name? Sorry, I'm having a name block. Jeremy Runnels, lovely guy, just adorable, so brave, so powerful. And so I knew kind of what to expect in their trials. They'd all had quite a strong emotional, difficult period afterwards that was very hard for them. But because they shared that and talked through it, I was prepared. I was like, right, well, I'm not playing that game. They're not going to break me. I will break them, or whatever, you know, or at least it's not going to happen that way. I will go to this trial in charge. I will say what I need to say. I want it to have the maximum impact because this thing only happens once. And I'm not, they don't have any power over me. I've no respect for their authority to somehow cancel my priesthood or anything like that. That's ridiculous. You know, who do they think they are? Especially when you're being told off for doing something the church taught you to become, which is honest, principled, to actually love this religion and be. We're taught what to look out for. We're taught what apostasy is. We're taught in the temple what it is. In the temple, the religion of Lucifer is the one that hoards money, and you can buy anything in this world with money and power and influence, and is obsessed with political power. In the scriptures and in the teachings of Joseph Smith, you know, Lucifer's plan was control, telling people what they're allowed to think or not think, what they're allowed to read or not read, micromanaging every detail of their lives like the Pharisees did. And now the leaders of the church are doing everything the church taught me are the sure signs of Satanism, of Lucifer's religion. They're doing it. And so I'm going to say that I will call them Satanists because they meet all the criteria you taught me in seminary for an actual Satanist. They are it. They're doing it. And here's the evidence. And that's what my podcast was. So that was completely blew the minds of any TBM.
Yeah.
So I insisted on the whole High Council being there. So there's a good audience and lots of my friends there, which was actually a really positive experience. And the trial happened after COVID lockdown eased off and we were able to have that many people in a room again.
So that trial, we want to see the hat again. We have to see the hat. She's held up very well after this amount of time.
Still shiny.
What I want to make, I guess, really clear is that it still makes me really nervous to, you know, or uncomfortable to hear you use that terminology. I wouldn't excommunicate you for it, you know, because I completely hear where you're coming from, and surely it has to be okay that people have those types of different views, no matter how extreme it sounds. I don't want anybody to get the impression, though, that you are taking this as anything less than you know, completely serious. This has been your life. These are very high stakes. You prepared for it. I mean, really, I think you've been preparing for it for many years because you've seen what happens to people who speak out. So
I knew it would happen eventually.
So take us up to again what that's like for what that process was like for you, and then we'll move on to what it has looked like since.
So Lynn did an amazing job making this, thank you. She taught me out of a whole outfit. I was going to have like a big red sequined something or other, like robes and stuff.
Like a wizard or something.
Yeah, she taught me into just doing the hat. Because you know, the point was this is a farce. It's theatre. It is political theatre in a sense. It's about a power clash, and it's, and that's a sort of semi-jokes, you know, the covenants you're about to take away from me were made wearing a costume in a ritual. So, you know, why not have a hat for this one too? And just to kind of break the ice a little bit, you know, so my thing has always been to be very intense and passionate and serious, but also have a sense of humor, you know, to be a bit self-deprecating. And it did give them a chuckle, you know, I just put it on for a bit at the beginning and then took it off, you know. And what was really cool was a lot of people there were people I'd grown up with since I was a child. You know, I haven't flown far from the nest in the church here. So I had people who loved me dearly and I loved them, and we've been friends all our lives. You know, we did a whole primary and youth together. And the stake president very graciously allowed all of them to ask me any questions they wanted to. We had, you know, I didn't prepare the killer speech that was going to change the world. I just got, as I think Natasha Helfer and others found, the second you're in a public role in the Bloggernacle and you've got an impending excommunication trial, all media hell breaks loose. You're talking about it. You want an audience to come with you, so you have to give a lot of time to keeping people updated. I was posting about what was going to happen and what my plans were. You're, in a sense, you're like a politician dealing with constant journalistic attention, because you want to use that. You want to communicate. You want this to count. You want this to be part of the narrative in a positive way, to highlight and draw attention to the issues and the power imbalance in the church and how power is being abused, in how it's being used against you to try and silence you. And I wanted to kind of break all the rules of, you know, so I managed to say enough useful points in the time that I had. My surprise and disappointment in the response was that the stake president just went on and on about the language that I'd used. He listened twice through hundreds of pages of material. Actually, he refused to listen, which is interesting. He would never listen to the audio, but he read the text of each of my episodes that I posted. And he just sat there and listed all the rude words I'd used, all the insults, all the things, as if that's what my podcast was about. Not the those were the quick light moments to try and alleviate the boredom of hours and hours of evidence, of truth, of proof that these people had messed up and were corrupt and were contradicting each other and themselves and the gospel that we'd been taught growing up. And so that was disappointing, that in a sense he could never look past the tone policing. They're also powerful and symbolic. This is how ridiculous this is. People can't engage with your actual ideas because they've been carefully trained. It's a brilliant cult tactic that they can't hear past the words you're using to the message that you're giving. And of course, everyone had said to me, look, these people aren't going to listen to you unless you tone down the words. But to be honest, unless you're blunt with the words, they're not listening to you anyway. They're not going to understand there's anything wrong. They'll listen to you like they listen to General Conference and not notice any problems. So you have to spell it out. And that's me. I'm just being myself. Yeah.
Do you think that? Did you ever think that they were there to listen to you, or did you think they just were there
Yes.
to box and actually go through the process of excommunicating you? That decision was already made.
Yeah. What was very clear from the excommunications of those other three was it was a stitch up and they weren't there to listen at all or engage. What was very different here was my stake president had made, you know, quite a lot of effort to listen to me. I don't think he ever got much of it, well, actually, he was in many ways quite supportive. He said, you should write a book. Like, I really agree with a lot of what you're saying. Write a book about it. You know, he was hungry for change as well, I think, but it just reached a point where he was probably getting constantly called by people saying, why is Peter still able to say all this, which is completely forbidden in our culture, and you haven't done anything? So I think he must have come under incredible pressure to do something. He said he had, you know, he told me that, but he said, I will make my own decision. You know, he said he wasn't going to be swayed by that. He'd make it on the basis of his own judgments. And it can be a personality thing. It's all leadership related in the church. Brilliant questions, very spot on, really very relevant from him and his counsel, or his counselors at least, and the high counselors. So I absolutely came out buzzing. I had been heard. I was able to make lots of the points I wanted to. Several of the high counselors and I think because I dragged it out a bit and bought some time by saying I want everyone there, not just the stake presidency, I'd sent everyone links. I'd explained exactly what the issue is. I'd emailed all of them I could get addresses for. They knew what the issues were. They could listen to my episodes. So several of them they'd listened to the podcast, couldn't ask for more than that. And nearly all of them said they agreed with pretty much everything I said in it. So in that sense, it was very positive. And they had a long discussion afterwards. When we went out for a meal, and when we came back, they were still meeting and talking. I mean, they may have followed up with a High Council meeting, but if they were talking about us, it went on for a long time. I was also disappointed that I'd made very clear in the preamble and during the trial itself, and reminded them before it, I was asking for answers to 3 questions, and the state president refused to engage with any of them. And the 3 questions were: number 1, why have the First Presidency appointed themselves without a vote of the people? Number 2, why are they hoarding donations to humanitarian aid perpetually? I was a ward clerk. I've been shoveling this money into envelopes for years. All of that money donated to these extra funds by the British saints were sitting in a bank account declared to the Charity Commission every year, earning interest, none of it being spent on the promised things. What's going on? I asked him repeatedly to find out what's going on with that. And the third one is, what's the right thing for an elder to do? I have made oaths in the temple to protect my people, to be a shepherd in Zion, the oath and covenant of the elders quorum of the Melchizedek priesthood, to be the watchman on the tower, to protect and build the kingdom at the cost of my life if necessary. When I see that it is being destroyed, that my family and friends are leaving the church, not because of Satan, but because of what the leaders of the church are saying. You could say Satan. And that what they're doing, what's the appropriate thing to do? Do you shush and take it and have no ward in 10 years? Or do you say something? Do you talk about it? Do you try and promote change, reform, whatever it will take to save this thing? And refuse to answer all of those. A few lame excuses of, well, when I've asked for money to charity efforts, I've got it, so it's okay, I'm doing it right here. Or I'm teaching the youth about the gospel topics essays, and I'm like, yeah, but you're not teaching the people, judging me in gospel doctrine. The adults have heard nothing about them. And if I mention anything from them, I'm the apostate one, I'm the threat, I'm the danger who needs to be silenced because you have failed to educate them, which I also said to Nemo's state president. So that was never addressed. I had the chance to appeal to the First Presidency, so I sent a very short 26-page letter to them, reiterating the same points and a few others. They affirmed and refused to engage with those questions. So I was delighted because I made all the points I wanted to, and I was able to share that, and we used the system to as best we could,
So once the result has once you've been notified of
Yeah.
what the decision has been made, that decision was upheld. The appeal was they upheld the decision. I want to ask Ruth and Sarah, and then separately Lynn. When Peter was excommunicated, what did that do in UK Mormonism? What did it do for you guys personally? Because it was on your radar. Did it help? Did you feel that the church was stronger or safer?
Gosh, no. No, I think all it did was underline what we already thought we knew, which was the church is scared of people vocalizing their concerns, and the church is scared of being held accountable. Ironically, held accountable. All the character traits that we as active Mormons thought were commendable, the church as an organization doesn't hold as important. So integrity, accountability, honesty, truthfulness, repentance, all of those key character traits that we thought we were drawing from the church, it turns out we're part of us as people, and the church as an organization is the bad place. It really is. And I think when Peter was excommunicated, I felt terribly sorry for you guys, because it's brutal, and it's a horrific medieval sort of practice to visit on someone's spirituality, isn't it? It's cutting, or it's an attempt to cut you off from your society and from your support, and potentially, your eternities. It's an attempt to do that. Now, fortunately, there are enough people standing around. And I know when we were at Sunstone, I use this analogy with Nemo, which is, it's like cutting off Laban's head in the street, but we're all standing by watching now. And we're saying, go ahead, chop his head off, and we will witness it. And we will hold you accountable for your actions. You are not in a quiet street on your own here, you know, watching this brutality going on. There are bystanders, and we see what is happening here. And it you know, 2 years on, that's a whole mission, isn't it? You have served a mission in your excommunication now, Peter. You know, it is. And have you spoken for truth? Have you borne your testimony as a missionary in excommunication? Absolutely, you have. Have you converted anyone to your side? Who knows? I don't think it's about that. It's about speaking up and speaking truth with integrity. And that is what you have always tried to do, whichever side of Mormonism you're sitting on. Speaking, bearing testimony isn't about parroting the Mormon catchphrases to please the people, the powers at the top. It's about speaking from your heart and saying what you know to be true. And I think you do that, and you carry on doing that, whatever the cost has been to you, and you know, that's commendable.
Absolutely. Sarah,
Thank you.
what were your thoughts?
Peter's excommunication had a profound effect on me for a long time before Peter had been excommunicated, maybe a couple of years, whatever. We'd all been meeting regularly online and doing Sunday school lessons, gospel discussions, trying to find answers, trying to support each other, trying to think about what was going on in this church. When in all the discussions that were going on leading up to Peter's excommunication, for me, it was just, this church doesn't want to listen. This church is actually, and a takeaway comment that Peter made at one point at Sunstone a couple of years ago, when he said that actually church is a bit like North Korea, which is not the exact phrase, but he's liking the way the church carries on to North Korea. And when they excommunicated Peter, I just thought there's no room for truth. There's no room for people who want to speak truth to power. And there is no room for anybody to be listened to and to be heard and to be allowed to have a faith journey of their own and questions and doubts without being pushed out, without being silenced, without being rejected, without being seen as a problem. And it just made me feel that they were taking away somebody that I loved and cared about, somebody that I'd had gospel discussions with and had learned from and had cared with and wanted to be around in the Mormon scene. And that just because they felt their pride was being hurt and their power status was being threatened, they wanted to silence Peter and take him away. And that felt wrong. And I remember, along with a lot of other people, because I think many other people did, wrote letters and spoke up for Peter and wrote to his stake president and said, actually, please don't excommunicate my brother Peter. I need him.
Yeah. We've just lost Sarah's audio again while it settles down. So Sarah's had some problems with the power outage in her home tonight, so she's been in and out and has sent her apologies, which of course we don't need, but we love you and we love your thoughts, Sarah. I certainly remember saying that I didn't know if my church activity was going to make it through Peter's excommunication. I found it devastating. And yeah, I'm still here apparently. Lynn, what did it do to you?
I think the actual event, they actually let a woman speak. They gave me some time to speak, which was great. I don't know how long they allotted me, but I don't usually take much time when I speak. I kind of try and be succinct, and I just basically said to them that they didn't deserve him. You know, that one of them had said during the meeting that that if Peter didn't like the church, if he didn't think, you know, if all these things were wrong, then he should go and make his own church and leave the church. And my response to that was, it's his church. He's been brought up in this church. It's his church. Why should he leave it? And that they did. That my thoughts were that they didn't deserve him. They didn't deserve his brilliance, his genius, his bigging you up now, darling. No, but you know, he puts his all into everything. He puts his heart into everything, and it was upsetting to me that I get upset when I'm misunderstood, and I was upset for Peter that he was being misunderstood, that his intentions were misunderstood, and I went to the event. Because, you know, the actual meeting, the actual excommunication, because I needed them to know that I stood with my husband, that I stand with him in what he is saying, and he is voicing, what he's voicing is what I felt as well, and many others felt and feel. And so I needed them to know that that was my choice. And you know, that I stood with my husband, and it was upsetting to again think of the fallout of that when that line breaks, when they're not just doing that to him, they're doing that to us, they're doing that to me as well. They're breaking a covenant, they are breaking our temple ceiling. That's it now, we are not sealed, you know, this thing that I had waited for, worked for so long in the church, and then you know, achieved this marriage, this sealing. That's all. That their choice was not just about what they were doing to Peter and Peter's apostasy. Their choice involved me as well. So those were some of my thoughts and feelings. And sorry, you can ask the question.
Yeah, our OG Brit Avenger, Alana, like the rest of the audience, just who love you guys. We always talk about how amazing Peter is, and it's absolutely true. And thank you for just pointing that out again, Alana. I want to ask you, Peter, to bring in the thing that gets said at some point in the background after we've been speaking about you. We hear from Lynn, but Lynn has been a strength to so many people in so many different ways, and obviously because your story has been so high profile, and you know you're the person who has the podcast, you're the face in a lot of ways, the daddy of the Brit Avengers. Tell me about what you feel about how your excommunication and how this whole process has affected Lynn.
I think it's been a huge sacrifice for her, because all the time I'm doing all this stuff in social media and so on, I'm not being any use to her or at home. And it's a big sacrifice, and it's one that she almost has no choice over, because she loves and respects me. She knows she can't tell me to stop doing it, in a sense, and wouldn't do that, I don't think. Though obviously feel free to if you need to. So that's just a very generous act of love, which I do appreciate, and really powerfully, I've felt incredibly supported by her throughout. I think again, part of my motivation has been the harm that has been done to my wife, the pain that's there from what she experienced as a single mother and so on, and being dangled on a string, constantly promised guaranteed blessings if she paid tithing on her welfare support, if she prayed enough and went to the temple and did all the busy work for the church for free, promised these rewards, promised in her patriarchal blessing in particular, you know, married to Peter priesthood with children, and all of that, and the damaging harm of promising things you can't keep, you know, that you will betray the people who trusted you and your religion and your institution to deliver that for them. obviously she got Peter priesthood for a while at least, so well done. But you know, and that's just symptomatic of the wider harm done to so many people, and why so many people conclude they cannot bring up their children in this culture, for all its good, for all its strengths and its community. Not that there's much of that left when your ward disappears, you know, and you haven't got kids anymore at church for your children to socialize with. It's very different now in most of the country, to what we experienced. Yeah, it's powerful. I'm grateful. I do say to her, I think I do regularly enough, that that I really appreciate that and love her for that. And she's stepped up, and you know, she's taken on getting out of her comfort zones a lot to be this public, to join in with the Brit Friends. She's like, well, you can't beat them, might as well join in and have some fun, you know, and contribute great things. And she is amazing. Lynn is far more incredible than she ever realizes, as you well know.
She's a
And
great
so I
dancer
feel very
too.
supported and loved.
I've
Yeah, she is.
danced with Lynn. She is
She's a
amazing.
lot of fun. She
And
can rave.
yeah,
And I appreciated the support from the wider community as well. You know, when you guys at 21st Century Saints reached out, you know, straight after the excommunication, to really offer a lot of blessing and support emotionally and so on, that I really appreciated that. I tend to be very intellectual. You know, I'm not going to sit here and cry and emote and so on, however hard you try. And you've tried really hard, Jane. You've come close.
do
But
you have do you
but that
have
doesn't mean I
feelings?
don't have these feelings. You know, I am very passionate about this.
Actually,
There's a
I
lot of
know.
emotion behind what I'm doing, you know, and I have felt incredibly supported and loved. And the letters that came to the stake president, I mean, honestly, he hardly even mentioned them. He just said, I've read them all. But they were powerful, and they were from active members, leaders in the church, as well as inactive. And I would sort of expected that to have more of an impact, you know. But
The
so
church
yeah.
is most definitely not better having, you know, been
Mm,
through excommunicating Peter Bleakley.
mm,
It's a loss to the membership
mm,
of the church. But
mm,
interestingly, perhaps unsurprisingly to anyone who knows you, I don't know if the church leaders themselves have been surprised, you did not leave the church. You are still there. You're still going every week. Now, we checked
mm,
in with you around about a year ago. Um, Although you tend not to be feelings based, we were deeply concerned about the impact that that must have on someone.
mm.
And so, yeah, you don't have to talk about feelings if you don't want to, if
No,
that's
I'm
not.
happy to.
But oh my goodness, how
Mhm.
are you coping? And
Yeah,
what you termed the church in exile?
yeah. So it's amazing. It is difficult. It's painful going to church now. You know, I have to ask myself, why am I doing this? Lynn certainly does. Almost everyone says from either side, why are you doing this? And I think it really hurts, particularly when your own family members, like, seriously are like, why are you still going if you have all these issues with it? And what it is kind of, it's frustrating because they're not hearing the passion I have for this religion, even though I articulate it a lot. I mean, I think of all the nuanced or exmo or postmodern Mormon podcasters, I quote Mormon scriptures more than anything. I love the big ideas, the better ones in the better scriptures. I will refer to them. I want the church to be held accountable to its own good stuff, and to offer that as the solution for a lot of its own problems. So it really hurts most when people kind of can't see why I would want to carry on, when it should be so obvious that I love this community, these are my people, this is my tribe. It has become harder, you know. I've in a sense, I mean, my dad asked me a few interesting questions. We don't get to talk about this too much, but he asked, sort of in a sense, am I still praying, or kind of in a sense seeking what's my religious life? What do I believe? And what always surprises me is when parents of someone who's seen as a dissident kind of give up the hope that you're going to carry on being the kind of Mormon they want you to be, they still want you to kind of believe in God. It's like a desperate safety net, or even to go to another church. They'd find that quite comforting. And I'm just like, there's no rational basis for that at all, because you spent the whole life indoctrinating us that there is only one true church. Yeah, why would you want me to go to the apostate church? Why would that be anything good? But it just shows either how little they actually believe their own religion's truth claims, or I don't know, but it's desperate, isn't it? It's panic. It's like, please let there be some little glimmer of hope that at least he's still a bit religious. And a lot of people experience this with their families, where they've left the church and they're getting this kind of pressure, and their broken parents are so hurt. And this is again the harm that the church does by telling parents, you have lost your child, you're not going to see them again in eternity, they're on the path to hell, because they don't believe a load of lies anymore, you know, or whatever. So my experience, it kind of goes through phases. So I turn up at church. I will contribute in lessons if I can. I am self-moderating, although because I think the saddest thing is the trust goes. So normally in the past, I'd walk into my ward, I'd say hi to everyone, big hugs, beeline for anyone new or the investigators. I'd know the missionaries because I'd have them over for dinner every week. I was ward mission leader for years. I'd be encouraging the new members, getting to know them, trying to be a good fellowshipper. I'd be in the meeting making decisions about things, and all of that is now shut off from me. And people are lovely, and in part because I've got a long history with them. You know, we've served in lots of ways together and known each other for years. So I hope those friendships can continue. But the trust is gone. Therefore, you are no longer in the loop. You have no idea what's going on in the ward, or what they're thinking, or what the leaders are planning about anything. Not that anyone outside the ward council ever does anyway. I mean, that's always an eye-opener, isn't it, when you're not in the meetings, because so little of it filters out to the general membership, which shows what a waste of time they are, because it's just a load of hot air. It doesn't actually change much. So I can't go bounding up and make close relationships with the investigators, because everyone will panic that I'm going to corrupt them, and I respect that. So I'm always self-censoring and kind of holding back a bit. I can't just get. I used to get on really well with the kids. They come and draw in my art book and in meetings or whatever, but I can't, you know, again, I have to tread very carefully. So that sense of being part of a family with all the relaxed trust and interactions is not there. I clearly make people uncomfortable when I say anything vaguely different or challenging in lessons. I'm determined to keep doing that where it's helpful or appropriate to stand for truth and to nudge them along a little bit. I won't do that in front of new members and investigators, and I've reassured the bishop that I wouldn't do that. I hope he's reassured. I don't think they are. So I'm always dancing this dance, but here's why I keep doing it. I mean, there's a few reasons. I learn every Sunday. I want to be there. This is my people. This is where I interact with religion and get ideas talked about. And if what's said from the pulpit's a disaster, that teaches me something. That was wrong, but why? Because I have these alternate values, and that doesn't work. And is it congruent? I think if you're going to be in the place of trying to reform the church, you have to be present. Sorry, I should reframe that. You don't have to be present, but it helps a lot to be present, because then you can gauge what messaging are the members actually getting. And what I'm talking about in my podcast is not how to leave this church and move on, which is absolutely fine, and lots of people do that. It's about reform. So, and it's saying, you know, those crazy things Dalen Oakes said about there can't be any loyal opposition in the church. And most TBMs think, well, that's just one of thousands of things they say. I hardly noticed it. Why are you bothered? Well, they're still being quoted. When these leaders say something really terrible, it doesn't go away. It sticks around. These three other people in their general authority talks this month quoted him saying that, which has actually just happened. It does get into the psyche, and if you're not present challenging it, they get away with it. The Pharisees continue to get away with taking over this church with the wrong religion of control and thought stopping, and I'm going to fight that. You also get in chance encounters with people that you never get. In the last couple of weeks, I've spoken to one state president, really significant conversation, who's in sort of, you know, an emo state president, And I got to have 25 minutes or so with the mission president. In the week after, or a couple of weeks after, in Elders Quorum, I brought up, you know, what part of the reason I'm doing my thing, and I had to choose a moment when we didn't have any new people there, so it's all experienced people. It wasn't anyone whose testimony I was going to break or anything. And I said, I was trying to push for, like, we got to make some changes, or we'll lose all these new members that you're getting. You know, we've had some really good missionaries baptize a few people. But are we going to change anything so we don't lose them? And someone said, well, what? And I said, well, we're just baptizing loads of black people. Has anyone talked to them about how this church had racist segregation for 126 years? Has anyone done anything at all to inoculate them? And remember, you know, both Sarah and Ruth talked about how that, in it, even as white people, you know, in the church, had been shocking when you realized what had gone on with that, and how it'd been hidden from you. And you know, it's probably not. 2 weeks later, the mission president turns up for a baptism. I make a few vaguely intelligent comments in Elders Quorum. He kind of engages a bit, and you know, we click, and he can see that I'm not a twits. You know, I'm pretty sure he knows who I am and my reputation. Um, and we ended up alone in the room afterwards to talk. So I said, well, you know, would you mind me asking? I'm really curious. Do you have any way? Do you give your missionary some kind of a spiel to say to black investigators, to kind of help them cope with what's coming, or to inoculate them? Because in the past, the missionaries were given a spiel to put black people off joining the church. Like, they actually had a script the church gave them to make them, like, not really want to join by being upfront about it. And he said, well, we talked with the missionaries about difficult things, but it was very clear they didn't have anything specific for this. I said, well, you're baptizing black people today. Has anyone told them this stuff? What do you think is going to happen down the line? You know, and that led to a really interesting conversation. He was clear that, and you could see he'd been very carefully trained that, and he said it, that all the missions should be consistent with what they do, which I was pleased to hear, because the way a lot of people have hurt on missions is mission presidents going rogue and just breaking all the rules and being nuts. And he had clearly been clear, you know, it'd been drilled into them at mission president training. You don't initiate anything new where you are. You follow the program, please don't go rogue. But I sort of nudged him that the church loves innovations that work. They end up in the international training the next year. So maybe give it a try, you know. So I feel great about that. I got to say what I wanted. I spoke some truth to power. I was in the room with, I feel it was a gift from God. I mean, when does that happen? You're talking to your elders quorum about an issue to do with priesthood, missionary functioning, and then I was able to have the conversation with the actual mission president 2 weeks later. Brilliant, love it. What he does with it is up to him, but I know he heard it from someone. We communicated a little bit back to the institutional church from the church in exile, the reason why people are leaving, the reason why you hurt people. So that's part of how I see my role, is to speak back to the church, if they want to hear it, the wisdom, the collective knowledge and experience of all the people like them who left. And I think that I'm trying to be that bridge. And finally, it is a bit, I told you so. I'm going to be there when they close my building. I don't want them to get there, but they will. You know, we're down to about 40 members. They think the second coming has arrived because they've just baptized a few people, but none of them are families. Maybe not. There's maybe a parent with a couple of kids recently. But it's not going to save the church, you know, and people are still leaving. So I'm a witness, you know. And again, it's so much like the Book of Mormon. You have these prophets who are witnessing the end of their civilization, Mormon and Moroni. So powerful, the story there, the narrative of watching your people disappear and self-destruct, really. And I'll be a witness to that, and I will, you know, I would like it to be avoided, and I'm doing everything humanly possible to encourage and gather and suggest ways to reform to stop the destruction happening. But they probably won't listen. We all know this, or not enough, or not in time. So I'm going to be there as a witness. I'm going to watch it die, which it is already. and I'm going to carry on being present, because normally the people that were hurt by these dysfunctions have left and they're long gone, out of sight, out of mind. Every time someone offers me the sacrament in sacrament meeting because they still haven't told them, you can't give it to me because I'm excommunicated, and I have to tell them no thank you, the bishopric are watching that. The bishopric who sat there and took the phones outside of my excommunication trial, and sometimes the state presidency who are there, they're watching that when that happens. And I'm okay with that. I used to do that to people when I was passing, so I forgive them. But I don't want it to be comfortable for them. You can't bring about reform without making the people in power very uncomfortable with the status quo. And if I go away and shush, it'll all look fine, everything's great, and then they close their building anyway. These guys, they're going to close the building in front of me. I'll be watching them. I'll watch our church turn into a McDonald's, and I'll be standing next to them. And maybe they'll turn to me and say, yeah, you kind of had a point, didn't you? We have no stake anymore. And it's also short term. It's all going to happen in the next few years.
Yeah,
It's not like a
absolutely.
long drawn out process. So I've got time for that. I can
Mhm.
still do some other projects afterwards. So that's the very odd mixture of motivations and reasons I'm still there. And
Almost
that's,
as final thoughts, Peter.
yeah, yeah.
I'm going to come round everyone in a moment,
Mm.
but seeking rebaptism, is that an option for you?
No, I will accept a profound apology and reinstatement of my membership, with the cancellation of my excommunication from the First Presidency. I'm not going to grovel and pretend I sinned and repent. That's insane. In my head, I'm not excommunicated. They have no authority whatsoever to have done any of that. It was all an injustice. One of my points all along was the First Presidency doesn't have any authority, and they're the key holders of the whole machine because they appointed themselves without a vote of the people. So they literally haven't followed their own rules in the scriptures. So they don't actually have any, even as a believer, if I was, or whatever I am still believing, they have no authority to any of this. Someone just ignore it. I'm still wearing my temple garments. You tell me I can't wear my garments. What, you're
I
gonna
am
make me?
bloody
What,
proud of you, Peter Bleakley, and I am
Yeah,
so glad that that you are still trying to make a difference, because you have
yeah,
helped so many people. Lynn,
thank you.
how's this all been going for you then? How are you right now?
What's your relationship with the church now?
Oh, I don't have any patience for it. I feel like when Peter goes to church, or if I drop him off, I've even stopped dropping him off because I feel too guilty watching him go in the building on his own. I feel like I'm sending, you know, sheep amongst the wolves. It's just like I feel bad. So yeah, he walks to church and goes on his own, and I can't tolerate being there. I just right from when they, decided to excommunicate him, I think I even said to them when I had the time to speak, if you think that this is going to make any difference to Peter being here or not, and speaking or not, you don't know him.
Mm.
So, you know,
I'm a force ghost now.
yeah, exactly. It's
Lynn,
not going to
you
make any difference.
also
So
you still from time to time when you have a reason to, you still use your vote as a member. Is that
I
correct?
do, yeah,
Mm. Mm.
yeah,
Tell me a little
I do,
bit about that.
yeah. So I like to try and invite a vote opposed I think it just kind of like happened. Nemo was floating the idea, and then it happened to be our ward conference. So I was like, oh, okay, right, then I'm just going to go and vote opposed. I just thought it was a brilliant idea, genius idea. Yes, I can do that. I'm a member, and I can voice my, I might not have all the words and all the knowledge that Peter has, but I can put my hand up and I can say I oppose, and then I can have a conversation with the stake president about that.
I'm
And
really proud of
when
you doing that.
right, and when our
But that is her
Alana,
choice. Like, I'm not forcing you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. When our Alana
Mm.
voted opposed, you know, back it would have been just over a year ago now, Lynn came up to hold her hand while she did it. And what is wonderful is that our stake president, we are all so lucky in this circle that we won, you know, stake president roulettes. We have extremely fond nicknames for our stake presidents that are just because they are so brilliant. But yeah, our stake president said that he would have stopped conference not because a vote opposed happened, but to come and hug Lynn Bleakley. And I think that just goes to sort of show how well loved you are. And also that's how threatening this is. It doesn't matter what you're there for. Here's Lynn, and you're doing this incredible work. The vote opposed that we were just speaking about is going to become is a nice segue into what we're going to be just mentioning again in a moment. But to take us out for more closing thoughts, let's come to you first, Sarah. Do you have anything that you'd like to share as we close out the show? Oh, you're muted.
No,
You're
no
muted.
voice, no sound.
So we do apologise. We know that the screen and everything has possibly made everybody a little bit dizzy tonight. But we really wanted to help help Sarah be here as like she wants to be. So we are sorry for the technical problems that we've had. Do you want to try again, Sarah? Yeah, we're not getting any audio, but what we can do is share something in the comments, and we will have it all resolved for when we're back on Sunday. How about Ruth? Do you have anything?
I'm intrigued to see what the future holds for excommunication, because I think what you've done is broken the mold, Peter. There was a time when being excommunicated was the opportunity for the church to silence people and make you the unclean and people not to hold dear and in community, and both active and no longer active members of the church have not let your excommunication define their relationship with you. And I find that really intriguing. And I think it is a death knell for the whole process of excommunication. And I think going forward, maybe wouldn't it be nice if they excommunicated child abusers and people who beat their wives and people who were thieves, and didn't excommunicate people who had integrity and spoke with honesty and asked the tough questions? Just my thoughts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, Peter is our church. And thank you so much, Peter, for not just the work that you do, but for being bloody brilliant and a really nice guy who's so well loved.
Oh,
Peter
thank you
gives
for the
so
flattery.
much time to people, and is well loved for a reason, because you've connected and really supported so many of us. This
Thank you.
Sunday,
Can
we
I
have.
do a little postscript? Sorry, Jen.
Yes,
Just
please.
one
No,
thing.
please do.
Okay. So the bishop in Helston Ward, who sort of was ready to take my temple recommends and chase me out of the county, and this is part of the hope I have. A year later, we were visiting Helston again. We ventured back, and we were having a chat with him after church, and he was very chill. And he started basically saying everything I'd said in my talk. He started talking about how we need to sort of ease up a bit, how we need to, you know, accept people have different opinions about things, I can't remember all the details of what he was saying, but his paradigm was shifted. And another example I'll give is that kind of my first big controversial talk in some ways was years and years earlier, where David Eaton, a stake president of Maidstone Stake, asked me to speak just out of the blue a few years after my mission, I think, in priesthood training, like the semi-annual priesthood sesh for the stake leaders. and I had carte blanche to talk about whatever I wanted. And again, it was kind of a prototype of my whole thing, the difference between being a Pharisee and a Christian. And in it, I said, you know, we've got a really terrible history at times, particularly the baseball baptisms. You know, this is an example of how bad it can get, and the legacy from that, where our ward lists are full of people who were just kind of conned into getting baptized, but didn't really have a conversion. And that was just something I mentioned in passing. I talked about my granny and how you know, welcoming and tolerant she was, and so on. He kind of I've not told this publicly before. I haven't got any permission from him at all. But anyway, it ends well, bless him. He kind of hauled me into his office afterwards and said, "I really didn't feel the spirit during your talk." And I said, "Okay, what was it I did wrong?" He said, "It was like about the baseball baptisms, because he'd been like a missionary in Scotland in that era. And how do you know that wasn't from God?" and so on. And I was just perplexed. I was like, well, they did send an apostle to stop it, so that's kind of a clue, you know. But he was in very TBM mode at the time, and for which I've forgiven him, and just couldn't compute that anything the church had ever done could be wrong. But years later, who is the guy who is attending Sunstone, who's reaching out, who's hosting the first that we're aware of in Coventry Stake, come and ask any difficult questions, let's talk about the gospel topics fireside, which is when we went along and made the girl cry, to tie up your other loose end from earlier, because she hadn't heard of any of this and kind of blundered into some post-Mormons or nuanced people talking about difficult stuff, and has absolutely become an advocate and a voice for a big tent Mormonism. So that's why, and it's absolutely not right for everyone to be in this space or trying. And I'm not claiming it's all down to me, obviously. This is just, you know, some random encounters in a much longer journey these people have gone on. But these are leaders who seems to be the worst of the worst, or seem to be very rigid, very uncompromising. Life, of course, kicks some poo out of them. You know, they had family members leave the church, whatever it was that kind of broke that rigidity and got them sensitive to the issues, and start to see that there is a bigger, you know, problem here that needs addressing. So I, as I'm a teacher, you can change horrible Neanderthal teenage boys into something a bit more civilized, and that's my job every day. So I do see the hope. People can be persuaded. There's still enough Christianity there and common sense and values in amongst a lot of dreck, in Mormonism, in how it does everything, that you can appeal to that. And for some people, it's enough for them to start to change and reform. So that's why I still bother and engaging. And that's why I'm still trying to hold this very difficult space where everyone thinks you're stupid, with good reason, by the way. You know, I'm not arguing with any of their points. And it's quite lonely, and you have to be really super stubborn. So being a semi-autistic male is fantastically helpful for this. And or, you know, whoever manages to find their way to hold that space, I feel it's worth it, because it does reach some people. And if the institution is ever going to reform enough to stop hurting people, those changes have to happen. These people have to be persuaded. They have to hear it from us, even if their initial reaction is to threaten you in a meeting, or to excommunicate you, or to threaten to take away your temple recommend. You just have to kind of power through that, kind of firm in the knowledge that the reality journey you went on is absolutely going to hit everyone else at some point, and they will have to face those realities too, and they might well become an ally eventually. So it is worth still being the gadfly, the difficult one, the person saying the uncomfortable stuff. Otherwise, totalitarian systems cannot be broken. Some people have to get in there and say the stuff and challenge it in front of everyone. And that's why I still bother. And I really appreciate the others who support us, or even if they can't do it themselves, or who have taught me how. You know, I'm not doing this on my own. And I really appreciate that. It means a lot.
I
Yeah.
think your level of graciousness has been incredible. You give so much grace to so many people constantly. Peter doesn't hold grudges, and one thing that I've really appreciated amongst all of the Brit Vengers, as 21st Century Saints, we've talked about this a few times. We disagree all the time, and sometimes we get very animated about it, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant because having different opinions is completely valid. Sometimes on our journeys, it's a little bit more personal. So to use an analogy, the mother that I was when I was my oldest child, my kids now have a different mother, and to the extent where I have to apologize when I get it wrong, and it's empowering. The whole point about what we experience, during sacrament meeting, we're supposed to feel uncomfortable from time to time because otherwise there's nothing to bloody repent of. We're not going to get better if we don't recognize, you know what, I need to be better in this area. So to be able to accept criticism, it's uncomfortable. But I hate giving people points for realizing something that they should have realized. You had the opportunity to realize when someone was telling you this, and because you either didn't like the tone, or you didn't like how it was being delivered, or you just didn't agree because you didn't see it. While the thing about me is I both reserve the right for me and others to learn and grow, but also I feel really annoyed whenever you have to be forced into that position. So Peter, you're so much nicer about it than I feel. And sometimes we just don't know. The wonderful buddy John Dillon had mentioned a few weeks ago that he's calling it that the church is not going to make it in the developed world. And Peter mentioned this once or twice over the past couple of years. You're like, no, you're calling nothing just because you can't imagine a world without the church. Yeah, the early warning system has been sounded. So yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess it's so much better when people will just listen in the moment, and if you wouldn't be completely threatened by everyone who disagrees, that would be great. And Peter, you've modeled that, and I think you're amazing, and we love you. Okay, so before we say farewell to Peter, this Sunday we are going to have Safeguarding Sunday. We're going to be releasing our presentation that we did to the conference, the one that we previewed to the leaders. It ended up being a little bit different. We're gonna broadcast that this Sunday, and then we want you to watch Nemo the Mormon's channel this Sunday night, because it's going to be really good. We are going to be following up next Wednesday with a conversation that is extremely traumatic and painful for me right now. We're going to be talking about voting opposed, and there's a little bit of a struggle going on here. So the gang are going to be back again, and we are going to have Nemo the Mormon with us while we figure this out together. So we hope that you can join us. So this Safeguarding Sunday and next Wednesday night. In the meantime, Peter and Lynn, thank you so much for being incredible friends, and thank you for modeling the kind of Mormons or ex-Mormons or whatever that looks like, nuanced Mormonism. Thank you for just modeling the kind of humans that would be so much better if we all could be. You have blessed our lives, and so we just want to share our blessing with you guys, that wherever this journey takes you, that you feel supported, that you feel loved. I certainly have felt the spirit over the course of listening to you talk and the work that you do, Peter. These ideas that you are excited about, I think they are exciting. You make people feel excited about Mormonism. You also make us feel extremely threatened, and that's okay. That's absolutely brilliant. We're supposed to be So we bless you that you can continue this work and that you don't feel alone while you're in the church in Exile, because there's a lot of us who are with you in one way or the
Oh, yeah.
another.
Yeah.
On behalf of us, thank you to the Bleakleys. Thank you to all of the people in the chat, and we will see you again next week. Thank you, Ruth and Sarah. We hope you've found a flashlight and you're surviving there in your power cut. We'll catch you all next weekend.
She's
people.
got her emergency 72-hour emergency kit. She'll be all right.
She didn't Mormon for nothing. She'll be fine. Okay, good night to you all. Thank you so much.
Good night.
No.